Sidney and Patricia had 5 children. He was the international executive for Exxon. Drove a Volkswagen, drove himself to work. They would volunteer from time to time at the church or food shelters. They were just ordinary people. Opened up the garage door, drove up his winding driveway, realized his newspaper wasn't where it normally is, exited the vehicle to get it. That's when the female abductor drove the van right at the foot of the driveway. The male abductor opened up the side door and confronted the Exxon executive with a handgun.
And Sidney Reso complied with his directions to get into the van, but once he saw that they were going to put him in a wooden box, he reacted and a struggle ensued, and the gun went off accidentally and shot Sidney Reso through the forearm. It was a superficial wound. Duct tape his eyes, his mouth, his hands, and put him in that wooden box.
The destination was about an hour from the Reso homes. They had rented a storage facility where they were going to store the box, which would contain Sidney Reso. It was in Washington Township. It took about an hour. They got to the facility. When they entered the facility, they backed the van into the storage shed and offloaded the box.
It wasn't until about 26 hours later that Exxon received a phone call, and they said that there's a communication. You'll find a letter giving you details regarding the kidnapping fixed to a lamppost at the Livingston shopping mall. Sure enough, we found the letter taped to the lamppost, and that letter gave us information as to the actual demands of the kidnappers. Proof that they had Sidney Reso, they enclosed his credit card, his card from Exxon. And the demands that they made, they portrayed themselves as a eco-terrorist group. They called themselves the Warriors of the Rainbow. And several hours later, the next day, late at night, where they directed us to the Morris Park to find a letter that was behind a rock. And that letter gave more specific directions. It indicated that they wanted $18.5 million, which was the largest ransom ever in the history of any kidnapping. We were still operating on the premise that it was probably eco-terrorist, but at that point we didn't know. It was about 2 days later that they expected us to deliver the ransom package. My role was to assume the position of a Exxon executive who was the public information officer, and to receive all the phone calls from the kidnappers. And they called and directed me to a phone booth in Summit, New Jersey by the Villa restaurant. And I was to go to that restaurant and await a call and to have the ransom package with me. At the time, we had waited several hours for the phone call that never came. We didn't realize that one of the kidnappers had a problem with dyslexia and had reversed the last 4 digits of the payphone at the Villa restaurant. We came back and alerted Mrs. Reso, was really upset and disappointed, as we all were. And then there was a period of almost 2 weeks where there was no communication with the kidnappers.
On the evening of June 18th, a phone call was received at the FBI command post, which was under the disguise of Exxon phone number. And that kicked off a series of activities for what in reality was a second ransom night.
We came to the actual date when they wanted the money dropped, and they had very emphatic directions. I received the call, and we were told to be using the Reso family station wagon We had a female FBI agent driving that vehicle. She looked like the Reso daughter, Renee Reso, and was in the same age range. They directed us from one phone booth to another. You know, we were picking up notes taped to the bottom of a bench. Those directions were very specific. Go 3.2 miles, 4.1 mile. And it led us to this center where, like a construction site, and to wait a call by a payphone. And it was a very poorly lit area, and it was completely isolated, but that was the key phone call. When that call came in, I was wired, and all 250, 300 FBI agents and detectives would get instructions from the command post that there was an incoming call. They were all instructed to observe their respective phone booths. And sure enough, one of the FBI agents watching her phone booth in a kind of a strip mall, she sees a guy making the call at the time that I received the information that there was an incoming call. Then she hears that that phone call is being terminated, and she sees this individual, and she sees him hanging up the phone at the same time. They heard that the call was being terminated. But then she sees what obviously was the key. She sees him very discreetly removing latex gloves and then putting him in his pocket. And she realized that she probably had the kidnapper under surveillance. We were able to get the license plate number and determined that it came to a rental car agency in Hackettstown. So they decided to abort the mission that evening, returning the car to the rental agency. And sure enough, they made the arrest. They opened the trunk of the vehicle, and inside the trunk they saw all kinds of evidence. So they knew they had one of the kidnappers. And shortly thereafter comes to pick him up, and the FBI arrests her as well.
When they arrest him, they find out that it's a husband and wife team, Arthur and Jackie Seal. Jackie is a well-educated, she's a teacher. Art Seal was a retired police officer. He left on disability. Myself, another agent, and the detective interviewed Jackie Seal. And I asked her that night, I said, this family has gone through a 52-day ordeal. If you were in my shoes, just tell me, are we looking for someone who's dead or alive? And she said, probably dead. Sidney Reso actually had died within 4 days. And that night that they were going to pick up the ransom, we would have probably arrested him, but we wouldn't have been able to rescue Sidney Reso. He was already dead. Because Arthur Seal, she explained, had cut up the box that Sidney Reso was kept in, I asked her if she would be able to draw what that box looked like. And she remembered the dimensions. I think it was like 6'3" in length and about 3 feet, 3.5 feet high. It had a bunch of holes that were drilled into the box, air holes, and it had 3 hinges and a lock on it. And they kept his eyes duct taped, his mouth duct taped, and his wrists were duct taped, much to his disdain, because he had asked them and begged them, I'll cooperate with you, but please don't put me in that wooden box, and please don't duct tape my eyes and my mouth. And total disregard. They just ignored any request that he made and just put him back and kept him in that box. He had a horrendous career as a police officer. Fortunately, his father, for him, was a deputy chief in the Hillside Police Department. He had a history of police brutality, got his pension, and went out and got a job at Exxon in the security department. And he worked at Exxon for a while,
And then eventually they had the cutback, and they gave him a severance package, and they decided to move to Hilton Head, South Carolina. And they bought this very nice home, had matching Mercedes, and they bought a sailboat, a French sailboat that was over $100,000. I think it was $110,000. He didn't even know how to sail. You know, he came up with this plan of this ransom. Eventually, he went bankrupt, lost the business in Hilton Head. He lost the boat. The house was mortgaged out completely, and he finds himself in Vail, Colorado, working some job, and he's there for a short period of time, can't pay the rent, and the marshals put a lock on the door, and here he is with all these great ideas of becoming a very wealthy man someday. He's relegated to living in the basement of his mother and father's house, and that's where he concocts this plan, knowing, you know, that Exxon had paid the ransom in the past. He was going to up that amount to $18.5 million, and they were going to be able to sail off into the sunset with all that money. If it wasn't for Jackie Seal, we would probably have not been able to locate that body unless animals unearthed it. But she had a great recall because she explained Arthur went to school at Admiral Farragut, which was right in the area of the Pine Barrens. And he knew that area very well. And he explained to her he needed her to help him transport the body. She took us right to the area. We wound up getting the cadaver dogs. They alerted on that area, and then they started painfully and slowly, a very slow process of digging up the body, not to unearth any potential evidence. And sure enough, we recovered the body, and that night the FBI, the supervisor, John Walker, was able to return the wedding band to Mrs. Reso. He was buried only in his boxer shorts and with the wedding band on his finger.
Victimized by greedy and evil people. Art and Jackie Seal were the complete opposite of what Patricia and Sidney were.